Bro's talking about Adolf. He's on a first name basis. He said, you take a guy like, good guy. You take a guy like, right? He's just a guy. What the? Oh, Jesus Christ. He's a good guy. He volunteered for the German. The more, those people pop off. And it's interesting. It's interesting to think about. And it's something that I've been thinking about quite a bit, especially as Joe Rogan has had numerous people on his broadcast when he's not talking about, when he doesn't have like a billionaire who, literally drinks the blood of children, like not blood libel. I'm talking straight up billionaires who are doing, unironically doing the blood rituals to, I guess, maintain their youthful nature, while simultaneously inventing new ways of killing children overseas. He then turns his crosshairs on to he then will have these guys who seemingly are very anti-Semitic. He's had a couple of these hosts, a couple of these guests on his podcast recently, and this guy is apparently getting a lot of attention from normies. Now, it's an interesting guy. What's his name? Darryl something? I forget. Joe Rogan platforming Holocaust denier and believing him at his word is the logical conclusion of right-wing conspiratorial thought. He's too stupid to keep it a secret. Yeah, this guy is apparently... Wait, I thought you were for free speech, only speech you agree with. I am not. Oh, God. First of all, I think it's very stupid for a lot of you to come in here and talk to someone like myself who is unironically attacked with the purpose of deplatforming on a daily basis. I think in 2025, no one can fucking say that the people that are prosecuted the most for their speech are pro-Palestinian advocates. Okay, that's always been the case, but it's now become undeniable. That truth is virtually undeniable. As a matter of fact, this is a meta-analysis on what kind of speech is permissible, what kind of anti-Israel speech is even allowed or is very popular in mainstream political discourse. Okay, I am not an advocate for deporting or jailing people for simply just their speech, no matter how insane it is. Although I do understand that there are limitations to free speech, even in the expansive boundaries, the expansive, seemingly no boundary free speech that America has. There are still limitations to that, understandable limitations to that. There's no such thing as free speech absolutism. Okay. Having said that, American free speech protections have historically only protected the right, reactionary right, Nazi sentiment, things of that nature, and have never been as expansive when protecting leftist speech. It's literally still illegal to be a union leader and be a communist at the same time. In this country, we've had 2 Red Scares and we're at the precipice of the 3rd. So, having said all of that, this guy apparently is a historian, but he has some really interesting opinions.
Start going after the Jews.
Darryl Cooper is his name. This is an account that, as in noticing Jews. That's what that is, by the way. For those of you who don't know, is a dog whistle for noticing, how powerful Jews are, or how much Jews control American media and American power, or whatever the fuck. That's what the subtle, or I guess not so subtle way that Nazis try to signal to one another. All right, let's keep going.
You mean in terms of
rhetoric?
So yeah, if you take him at his word in Mein Kampf, which is, it's a piece of political propaganda, that he wrote as a sort of a politician in Germany in 1924, and so you have to take it with sort of a grain of salt, but it's also one of the few sources we have.
What do you mean? Is he implying that Hitler didn't actually hate the Jews? He was just doing political speech? He's hitting the New York Times note. Remember that New York Times article from 1933 or whatever, where they were like, Hitler rising to power is using anti-Semitism, but is he actually an anti-Semite? Probably not. No, he was, man. Like, it's not. What more do you need him to say and do for you to be like, nah, he was legit. Like, he actually hated the Jews. Like, what the fuck? It's crazy. Take Mein Kampf with a grain of salt. He wasn't a real one about, he wasn't a real hater. He wasn't a real hater of the Jews. It's like, the fuck?
Have like, and given his audience at the time, he probably didn't have a lot of reason to make this part up. Is that, you know, he had been from like small town Germany, right? And he was from a middle class family. His father was a civil servant, respectable people, and nationalism back then was very much like a middle class ideology. And the middle class people, nationalists, would complain about the work.
Bro said Germany when talking about Austria. He's like, you know, more Germany. Austria, as in Germany too.
And, you know, the proletariat, how they all want to be socialists, and none of them have any national feeling and everything. And Hitler really didn't grow up with any really even knowledge of the Jews. He says his father, he never heard him say the word. And, you know, if they had any in the small town that he lived in, like, they were apparently well assimilated because he didn't know about them. And so then he moves to Vienna when he's a young adult, and there's a lot of Jews in Vienna. And he starts to, you know, he's at the
Vienna, more Germany, at least according to Hitler. famous German city.
The bottom of society now. You know, he's literally living in shelters. He's hungry all the time. He's like down with the underclass after having grown up in the middle class. And so he's starting to get a look at what the German people, the German masses, you know, that he's like sort of as a child and a young man has like worked up this deep sense of like nationalistic fervor. He's actually getting an up close look at the underclass in Vienna, and what he sees is not particularly impressive, you know, which is often the case when, you know, you can have sympathy for and want to lift up, you know, the underclass in any society, but the reason you want to do that is because they're often living degraded lives in degraded circumstances. And so he gets an up-close look at this, and he doesn't like what he sees. And he says in Mein Kampf that it really caused him like a moral crisis, you know, an ideological crisis.
It always weirds me out. Like, look. Nazis and chattel slavery are literally the only two things, perhaps because of its closeness to contemporary history, there's the only two things that like historians will directly stamp like a moral, like not a descriptive, but a moral sentiment that they associate with in a negative way, and for good reason. Right? I think it was you know, pop historian Dan Carlin who once famously said like Genghis Khan was a far more violent figure, but because we're so far removed from his impact, we just kind of think of him as a leader of the world that changed the world in a dramatic fashion. He's a pop historian. You might not actually appreciate his perspective or whatever, but I think that he was kind of right on that, where it's like Hitler is too close for people to, for anyone really to associate with as anything but like a truly evil being, even though you're usually like historians usually will rarely ever describe previous events throughout history, no matter how world changing, world shattering, no matter how violent it is, with any sort of like moralizing. Like it's usually just very matter of fact. Obviously, there's a perspective that people have, a perspective people maintain, but it doesn't have that same stink associated with like when you talk about Hitler. Now, the reason why I brought all of this up is because it always rubs me the wrong way when I hear someone try to describe the background of Adolf Hitler with like moral ambiguity, or even the growth of the Nazi movement. Because it always feels to me, maybe I'm a baby about it, I don't know. But for me, I don't know anything about this dude, okay? I don't know anything about this dude. But for me, when I hear someone describe Hitler from the perspective of Hitler, it rubs me the wrong way. It almost feels like you are presenting him in a sympathetic manner almost, where he's like, you know, he's a real guy that got, you know, a real fucked over by forces, let's say. Maybe not the Jews, but some forces of a group of individuals from a ethno-religion that, you know, got together and had full control over our financial institutions and also the labor movement at the same time. It's like when you're going beyond offering context to how Hitler got there, and it kind of feels like you're being a little sympathetic, you know? I don't know. Maybe being fucking woke, I have a higher degree of sensitivity for stuff like this. But it does rub me the wrong way when I hear anyone who claims to be a historian that talks about Adolf Hitler while also simultaneously approaches it from a sympathetic manner.
He's like, are these the German people? Like, really? This is what we're talking about? And then he says, and you know,
because like so far, with some exceptions to what he described, what he's describing is something that, you know, you read in history books. As far as the overarching like feelings of humiliation and economic instability that was in Germany post World War I, the you know high number of veterans that were riddled with shell shock and seemingly had no job prospects, things of that nature. Like all this stuff definitely played a very important role in the rise of Nazi sentiment and also Hitler's rise to power. Okay, that's correct. It's just the way he's describing Hitler's evolution is strange. That's what I think.
This is the way he relates it. He says it was actually the key that unlocked everything else for him. Is that, you know, he would say he realized, we could say he came to believe that yes, these German masses, they are in a sorry state right now, but the reason for that is that by the Jews, by the Jewish press, by the, you know, the Jews who own the theaters and put out the, you know, the films and whatever else, all of that, they're being manipulated and corrupted by these people. And so for him, it became like, I think, you know, he had a lot of the same explanations and reasons you would hear from any anti-Semite then or now, you know, banking and whatever. Like all those things were like in there. But I think the thing that gave it emotional valence for him is that his anti-Semitism was what allowed him to love the German people.
What?
Feudal time.
Elon was just on Joe Rogan explaining how he couldn't possibly be a Nazi, and now Joe Rogan is platformed a notorious anti-Semite and Nazi defender. Like, I don't know if people are being hysterical about this guy or if this dude is like a straight up Nazi, but I do feel like he's just kind of covering the story like he might be a straight up Nazi. I don't know. Look, I'm trying to be as open-minded as possible. Now, the reason why I'm trying to be as open-minded as possible to what this guy is saying, okay, is because fucking normies are listening to this dude and approaching me in the real world going, dude, I know you like that Palestine stuff. Have you heard about this guy, Darryl? He has a series called Fear and Loathing in Jerusalem or something like that. Apparently he has like a Israel piece. And that was when I was like, oh no, oh no, no, no. Oh, what the fuck? This is like how normies are learning about the conflict. This is how normies are learning about the history of Israel. Okay. And I'm telling you, like, these are not like straight up fucking fascists. Like, these are normal people. I promise. When I say these are normies, I mean they're fucking normies. Okay. Germans who like to hide their pro-Nazi regards often talk like him in a group. It's very common in certain circles. Yeah. This is the guy who said on the Tucker Carlson interview that Churchill was the main villain in World War II, right? Is that the guy? And I think that how to treat them is sit down and what? If this is W. Churchill hate? No. As someone who does hate Churchill, I would not say that. Like, I think he's you know, Churchill's done a lot of awful shit. Okay, including to my people. I'm just saying, never forget Gallipoli. Okay, but all jokes aside, and the very serious crimes of Churchill, he was definitely not the bad guy during World War II. Okay, objectively so. The Allied forces were not on the wrong side of World War II. That right there, you are, if you say that there were complex figures involved in World War II that also in their domestic policies or in their, in their previous acts of foreign policy have made tremendous mistakes or have done a lot of violence, like that's one thing. But if you're saying Churchill is the main baddie of World War II, I mean, he's not even the top three, okay? We're talking about some real bad dudes, okay? He's not even in the top three. Nowhere near. That's a pretty crazy statement to make. That's all I'm going to say.
You've got the aristocracy, you got the church, and you got the peasantry. And then you have like another group of people who kind of serves a unique function, but kind of a uniform function across Europe in...
How do you explain Hitler materially without being empathetic? Like in the we're all products of our material conditions and banality, evil type way? Because I do think that he is. Someone else would have been Hitler if Hitler didn't exist. No, I did explain the rise of animosity in Germany and anti-Semitism's role. I literally just did. When I was talking about how he's talking about it versus how I would talk about it, I would cover it.
In the Jews, you know, they would very often be like. They played a very kind of critical role in feudal Europe, you know, because they were the only ones who had a network that kind of stretched across the whole place. And so a lot of times, like the rulers would have.
I think the funniest question to always ask is like, so if Jews are of one mind, okay, if they are a monolithic force as implied by anti-Semites, why the fuck were they also literally both in positions of incredible importance in finance, while also simultaneously they were the leading revolutionary forces historically? Like, it doesn't fucking make sense. They both, on the one, they're a monolithic force, okay? They're a monolithic force, but they also ideologically are both engaging in finance, and have, doing usury, whatever, but also simultaneously are like revolutionary figures that are communist, socialist, trade unionist. How the fuck does that, or in college, you know, professors and things of that nature? Like, the moment that you look at a banker and a fucking commie and think these guys are operating on the same fucking playing field is a moment where you've become a Nazi. That's it. No, a fucking banker and a fucking labor union leader are not operating with the same mindset. The only way you think that is if you're fucking racist, okay? Is if you're an anti-Semite. That's it. It's that simple. It's ridiculous. And the only way that Jews became monolithic in that process was because their victimhood was identical, because they were destroyed on the basis of being Jewish, not just on what their political ideologies were, okay? It's always the oppressors that actually don't discriminate in their discriminatory practices that actually end up monolithizing a group of victims. Same with fucking black people in America, okay? The reason why there is a black culture in the United States of America is because of chattel slavery. It is a culture that was born out of having your ancestral ties cut off in its entirety. Black people in America, when they were forcibly brought here, stolen from their homes for a lifetime of slavery, were robbed of their identity, robbed of their ethnicities, robbed of their culture, robbed of their language. And of course, they created like not a monolithic culture, but they were treated as a monolith by oppressors. Same with Nazi Germany and Jews. But beyond that, there's no fucking monolithic force there. It's just so stupid. If there was, there wouldn't be so many goddamn anti-Zionist Jews, okay? If that was the case, if Zionism as a force, as a political force, which does try to monolithize Jews to the best of its ability, if that was successful, if there was like some kind of other supernatural force behind all of this, and that Jews truly were a fucking monolith, then there wouldn't be so many anti-Zionist Jews. Okay? Then every Jew would automatically be a Zionist. That is not the case, clearly, in spite of Israel's best attempts to do so.
Of Jews working for them who, you know, they were basically like your diplomatic channels, kind of. You needed to like talk to people over there, or if you needed to raise money for something, they had large capital networks that could help you raise money.
Wouldn't the counterpoint be, but there are black cops and black Republicans? Yeah, no shit. That's why I'm saying black people are not a monolith either. What? No, that's my point. Exactly. No group of people are monolithic. It just doesn't work that way. We have the capacity to understand that when we talk about the in-groups like white people, right? Everybody understands that white people come from all different parts of the fucking planet, from different parts and there's different varieties, different sauces to white people. So when a white man does an act when a white man does a heinous crime, yes, people say, oh, all white men are like this or whatever the fuck. But like, there is no real systemic enforcement of that kind of discrimination. And that isn't like real discrimination to begin with, because everybody deep down inside understands that there is diversity amongst the in-group. You can trace your lineage back to whichever country whichever country your parents or your grandparents came from. Does that make sense? Just to be clear, this is not my opinion. Just imagining opposition counterpoints. Damn, chat. Yeah, I have listened to the Fear and Loathing podcast on Israel, and I thought he was critical of Israel, empathetic to the Palestinians. I really need help understanding what in the pod. The only one I listened to is like 3 parts. Are the dog whistles? I haven't listened to his podcast on it, and maybe there isn't a lot of dog whistles, but some of the stuff I saw here, he's a very interesting. He has some very interesting takes. A lot of Nazis were upset on like the nerdiest historical references that he made to like immigrant exclusionary acts that the American government has engaged in, and they were trying to like correct them. And he's like, no, you don't understand. I hate immigrants. Like he was like, no. The problem is like, I was explaining to Joe Rogan why America had an unlimited faucet of immigrants, but like what the distinction between the first Immigrant Exclusionary Act was versus the second one. And the first one was so that like, you know, we wouldn't let black people in from France. And even though we were letting people in from France, we just didn't want them exporting all of their, all of their black and brown people. We didn't even think about the third world and the global south at that time or something like that. That's what he was saying. He's like a fascist apologist academic for sure.
Money for it, things like that. But they weren't serfs or peasants. They weren't the aristocracy. They weren't the church. Obviously, they were kind of their separate thing. And most of the time, they were allowed to sort of abide by their own laws, like run their own little societies, like how they wanted, you know. But this was at a time when it was just taken for granted that different classes of people had different privileges and different rights.
Whoa.
Ew. Yeah, and then this guy posted this and immediately posted Adolf Hitler. Since Rogan brought up Hitler with Darryl and people are talking about him, let's actually watch Hitler since we can see it ourselves. Go to the tapes to see what Hitler and Dr. Joseph Goebbels actually said. Does it sound like today? Lol. Just not so subtle. This guy who really likes Darryl Cooper, not so subtle about what Darryl Cooper is implying here. And then he just, dude, this entire thread is just him reposting Hitler speeches. Insane. Anyway, I want to hear more. I want to hear more from Mr. Noticer, though, because there's more here. Darryl Cooper is legit, just like maybe the Nazis weren't that extreme. Yeah. I remember his conversations that he had with Tucker, where he very obviously is just like minimizing the Holocaust.
How did we end up here?
Yeah.
You know,
I'm glad you brought up the labor movement, because I've
like, this is apparently where they're talking about socialism, but it's the conversations that he had with Tucker, if I recall correctly, he was just like straight up minimizing the Holocaust. Like he made inferences to the final solution being like a logical inevitability, while also simultaneously talking about Jewish people not with the same language that Hitler uses. Like, he wasn't saying that they're parasitic, but he basically was saying in that conversation that, like, there was a valid security threat. Like, he was assuming Hitler's role or like the Nazis' position as though it was the norm. But he was using language in a way where, like, he was trying to give himself an out, right? He was trying to give himself an out by saying, like, oh, I'm just using descriptive language, right? But it was very obvious that he was, like, it's very obvious that he was handing it to the Nazis, if that makes sense. It's a more sophisticated version of anti-Semitism. It's not, if you're conditioned into, like, seeing dog whistles, then grasp that this is just a person who is, in a very sinister fashion, in a very cynical manner, trying to engage in Nazi apologia or historical Holocaust revisionism in a way that still affords him some semblance of plausible deniability, rather than just, like, saying the quiet part out loud. But a lot of the people that love his content, I think, understand what he's saying, if that makes sense. Yeah, I don't like it. I don't like that people that talk about Israel have this kind of background. I'm not particularly appreciative of some of the loudest seemingly pro-Palestinian voices having this kind of attitude, whether sheltered or unmasked, it doesn't matter. And these guys also then talk about Jeffrey Epstein too, which is another issue that I'm fascinated with. I don't like that they talk about that as well, because they most of the time they engage in the same commentary in a similar structure where they'll, like, talk about Jeffrey Epstein and his Israel connections. And I think that is understandable to point to and talk about, but they kind of massage it in a way where it's like, yeah, he's Jewish and he was working for Mossad only inside of American boundaries, and isn't that strange that Jews were able to operate in American inside of the United States of America this way? Like, all this shit is very frustrating, especially if someone is capable of not just doing shallow analysis, but if they're capable of, like, sheltering or feeding you anti-Semitic conclusions with nuggets of truth. I don't like that. But yeah, I want to see. There was another thing that he said. Like, he's, like, responding to the Joe Rogan quotes from a lot of people. Like, this is someone from NYU Review. Darryl Cooper: Hitler wasn't going around giving anti-Semitic addresses in public. Reality: Hitler addressing the entire Reichstag in 1939, declaring that he will annihilate the Jewish race. The context noted him. Hitler gave multiple anti-Semitic speeches prior to chancellorship. I must not have given them much to work with if this is the best they can come up with. It's not remotely controversial that Hitler modulated his anti-Semitic rhetoric based on his audience, and that he was aware that being aggressive about it was a turnoff to many middle-class city dwellers. He hardly made any public remarks about the Jews at all from 1932 to 1935, for example, and it's a fact that Hitler ordered Goebbels to call off the 1938 pogrom because of the negative effect on German public opinion. It's always a good sign when you force liars to speak their native tongue. What? I mean, he did say Hitler was just faking being anti-Semitic in the Mein Kampf. He inferred that, which is ridiculous. The Nazi Jewish problem was they existed. This was it. Yeah, Hitler tried again, going on the radio broadcast to call for peace directly to the British people. This is what I remember him talking about after the Tucker Carlson interview, and that's when I was like, oh, this guy's a fucking straight up, Holocaust revisionist, because the notion that the Jews are even a problem at all is basically assuming the role of assuming the worldview of Adolf Hitler in 2025. Does that make sense? That's what I was like. That's when I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, that's an insane thing to state. No, he did. He hated the Jews, man. That's like, he did the Holocaust. I don't know if you know that. Like, it's pretty obvious. He spent a good deal of time hating on Jewish people, actually. Kind of made it his life's work. The fuck? That's the thing he was known for. Anyway, it's just like I want to listen to his Fear and Loathing in Jerusalem and see if he has more statements like this in it, or if he's just like more honest about the analysis there. But make no mistake, I do think that this man is an anti-Semitic Holocaust revisionist, and I don't think it's wrong to state that he has sympathies for Adolf Hitler. Having said that, that could be a standalone work that he engaged with specifically to open the door to charitability for a lot of other like-minded individuals and Hitler pill them, if that makes sense. But yeah, I think he's a weirdo fascist in general, because he's like he's obsessed with the idea of seemingly obsessed with the idea of like developing ethno-states. Are you saying anti-Semitic based on the IHRA definition? No, dude, what the fuck?
Afterwards, there were a lot of the same
this whole thing
explanations
about
and
Hitler,
reasons
by
you
the
would hear
way?
from any anti-Semite then or now, you know, banking and whatever. Like all those things were like in there. But I think the thing that gave it emotional valence for him is that his anti-Semitism was what allowed him to love the German people. You know, like it was like the only way for him that he could get around the revulsion he was feeling and actually being up close with the German underclass. Is he excused their faults by blaming Jews, and so his sense of love for his people. And I mean,
he felt a sense of revulsion for the German middle class and the German underclass because he was a fucking fascist, but he coped in his mind by saying, no, the Jews made them this way. Got it.
Look, Hitler's one of those guys. I noticed this when I was reading all the Jim Jones books and stuff, which I think I read probably all of. They're not very good. You know, some of them are interesting, like they're good reads, but you can't help but notice, especially after you've read several of the books, that the authors just cannot help but be like cynical and turn it into a polemic on every page. Like even the thing Jim Jones or Hitler did as a child, they have like negative editorializing to it and everything. And it's like, you know, it really kind of, it's a lot of them are still.
He's like, I wouldn't go back in a time machine and kill baby Hitler. And I instead hate when people editorialize baby Hitler. I don't search the name of baby Adolf Hitler, let alone go back in a time machine and kill him. That's amazing. You should not tarnish the good reputation of baby Hitler, dog. What the fuck? He might grow up to be Hitler if you do that.
Good books.
Why is nobody humanizing baby Hitler? He's just a little guy.
You know, you read like the most recent sort of great Hitler biography by Ian Kershaw. Is a great book. He's a good historian, an excellent writer. And, you know, you have to learn to kind of see through that polemic a little bit, and then you have, you know, a good history on your hands.
It's almost like it's an obligation. If you're going to cover a horrific figure, you have to look at things that way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's and so I think that like people who knew Hitler before World War I, and we have like memoirs and interviews.
They love the guy. He was a great he was a party animal, okay? Oh God, with a particular taste for methamphetamines. He was so fun to be around.
With people who did know him pretty well. They say pretty much unanimously, like we never heard him mention the Jews back then. And this is the period in Vienna when Hitler says his anti-Semitism was developing and he was figuring these things out. And what I think was probably going on, like my read of it, at least up to this point, is that his anti-Semitism, just like a lot of people in Europe at the time, was theoretical and abstract. You know what I mean? Like the Jews had never. You got to remember.
As opposed to what? What? As opposed to what? How can racism exist in any other form other than theoretical and abstract? Like, is he trying to say like he hadn't done the Holocaust yet? Is that what it is? Because yeah, that's just how it develops. That's how all bigotry develops. It's theoretical and abstract. Unless you think that like there is, I don't know, maybe I'm misunderstanding what he's saying, but unless you think he literally had a valid reason to hate all Jews, then all hatred of that sort is theoretical and abstract. He might just simply be talking about how maybe at that point Hitler was a practicing anti-Semite.
Like the Russian Revolution, all of the things that people like Hitler would associate with the Jews, like none of that stuff had happened yet. Like he might not like them, you know, he might think that whatever, all the stereotypes that go along with him, but it was just sort of an abstract thing that it wasn't dangerous, right? But then the First World War happens.
It wasn't dangerous.
And, you know, it's really impossible for us today to understand the level of...
Reinhard Heydrich, who planned the Holocaust, actually had a friendly rapport with a fellow Jewish student in school, yet... Yeah. It's crazy because, like, it's crazy to have these... Like, I don't have an issue with trying to assess how Hitler's anti-Semitism came to fruition. That is a perfectly valid and perfectly reasonable and very instructive thing to do. Okay? That's important to understand. It's important to recognize. It's important to figure out so, you know, we can stamp it out, right? You should learn about that. Just like with the Holocaust, you should learn about it. But it's weird to talk about it as though, you know, he was personally wronged. Like, if that's where he's going to go with this, where he was like, well, you know, when he went to art school, he was denied entry because of a famous Jewish artist and his, like, morally degenerate artwork that was seen as cutting edge at the time, and that's what really ticked him off. Like, that's, you know, that's an insane reason to do the Holocaust. You know what I mean? That's like, it's like doing comedy at that point. You're making a joke, I think. The one time someone was like, your artwork sucks dick, dog. He was like, I'm gonna fucking come back and show you, okay?
Just trauma and devastation that war had on, I mean, the European countries that were in, or all the countries that were involved. I mean, it was, you know, you're talking about a war where, you know, for several Olympic Games afterwards, there were whole sports that, like, France and Germany just didn't participate in anymore because they didn't have the people for it. I mean, you're talking about massive chunks of the young male population being killed out there, right? And you take a guy like Hitler, who volunteered early, like right away, and he survived the whole 4 years of the war, and you think about him as just an example of this generation of people who spent, like, their most formative young adult years in the trenches. I mean, in constant terror of doing things that, I mean, forget about...
Bro's talking about Adolf he's on a first name basis. He said, you take a guy like Hitler, you know, good guy. You know, you take a guy like Hitler, right? He's just a guy. What the fuck? Oh, Jesus Christ. He's a good guy. He volunteered for the German right away. He got the call to action, you know, the call of duty was in his heart. Real patriot. Real misunderstood patriot. Fucking love the guy, okay? Joe, let me tell you, I fucking love this guy, okay?
Just like the physical discomfort of living there. I mean, you're in the mud, you're covered with lice and fleas all the time, so is everybody else. You're, especially later in the war, you're, like, living off of starvation rations if you're a German or an Austrian. And you're watching... I mean, you know, Dan Carlin's series on World War I is, like, probably my favorite piece of audio.
Incredible.
It's so good. And, like, you know, one of the things he's so good at, way better than me at.
Didn't Dan Carlin call this guy a fucking Nazi? That's another classic Joe Rogan guest, but I guess Joe is... Joe no longer has guys like that on as much. He mostly focuses on guys like this instead, if you know what I mean.
Is... kind of capturing the scale of events, you know? And so when he talks about, like, the Battle of the Somme, when the British lost 60,000 guys on the first day, you're like, I don't even know what that even means. Like, it's just so overwhelming, you know? And so you have this generation that's spent...
It's crazy because, like, famously, no one else engaged in trench warfare. And famously, no one else... before or after ever experienced such traumatic events, famously. Because otherwise, how else are you going to do the Holocaust, right? Like if that's the primary reason why it happened, I feel like, you know, why is the mechanized death of the industrialized version of death during the Holocaust so singular for Europe? Because they had pogroms. They did a fuck ton of pogroms in Europe and in Russia, right? But this was a little different, you know?
Their formative years.
And there's also obviously plenty of other countries that didn't do that, despite the horrific nature of war that they also exhibited, that they also experienced.
In all of these countries, under those just circumstances that we really don't have any context for us to relate to, you know? I mean, think about like, you see these stories of like people sleeping in trenches, and over there in the corner is their dead friend who's been sitting there decomposing and being eaten by rats for 3 or 4 days because you can't go up top to bury him because you'll get shot. And you can't bury him in the trench, in the dirt under the trench anymore because there's already bodies just completely wall to wall down there. You've already taken up all the space, right? Just that kind of, I mean, if you think about somebody today, if you walk outside your door on the way to work, your average person today, and there's a dead body on your steps. The average person today is going to be in therapy for years over that, you know? I mean, that is a traumatic experience.
Yes, bro, we know. We saw All Quiet on the Western Front. Some of us even read it, okay? We know it was bad. Come on, move on. I want to hear, like, God damn, dude. He's just, like, really fucking...
difficult, unbelievable experience. And from Germany east...
Yes, World War I was particularly brutal, yes.
...word after... You know, if you go back and think about what the map of Europe looked like in the year 1900, it didn't look anything like it looks now. It was basically like just a few big chunks. You know, you had France, you had Germany, the German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and then you had the few like Spain, the Balkans and stuff, little things going on. But really, it was just a few giant empires controlled everything from the Pacific Ocean in East Russia all the way over to the coast of France, right? And everything east of Germany.
Is this guy trying to sympathize with the Nazis? No, he is sympathizing with the Nazis. He's not trying to. He is actively. If he's trying real fucking hard, okay? And succeeding, as a matter of fact. He is succeeding. He's successfully sympathizing with the Nazis. Now, he might not come across as sympathetic if you know what he's saying, but he has succeeded so hard that I would maybe say he might be a Nazi. I don't know. But
1917, 1918. Those governments literally evaporated. They went away. And so, you know, you get to the immediate post-war period after these guys have just gone through this unbelievably harrowing experience. You know, their lives have been defined by violence for years, you know, at this point. And all of a sudden there's just state collapse everywhere from Germany to Siberia. And you literally have, you know, private militia.
You know what's crazy, by the way, about like talking about this from the perspective of, here, I'll tell you exactly why this is sympathetic to Hitler. Okay? World War I was a harrowing experience. Trench warfare, bodies decaying right next to you, children that you grew up with their fucking heads blown out, rats eating their carcasses. Yeah, dude. You know who else was also fighting in the German military? Fucking Jews. None of them became Hitler. What are you talking about? Like, what do you mean? Like, what are you talking about? The Jews were also in the German military in World War I. They were in the fucking trenches next to Hitler. What kind of stupid fucking statement is this? He's like, yo, but you don't understand. Hitler was really down bad, dude, because of World War I. Yeah, okay. So were the fucking German Jews that were also fighting alongside Adolf. What the fuck? And Frank's father, Otto, was famously a World War I veteran who was awarded the Iron Cross by the Kaiser. Like, yeah. You know why we know about Adolf? Because out of all of the fucking Germans that fought in World War I, there was one Adolf, dude. Like, the fuck? He's just the guy. Okay? Yeah, what did they get? 100,000 Jews served in the fucking German military in World War I. More than 10,000 of them were killed in the process. You know what Adolf did? He turned around and killed the fucking rest. That was his thank you to the homies that he fucking fought in the trenches with. What do you mean? What is this statement? What kind of fucking stupid shit is this? I don't understand how no one is going, wait a minute. Like, Joe, I know Joe has an ape brain, okay? I know he has an ape brain. But, like, in your ape brain, you have to be like, wait a minute. But the Jews were, you know, there's some Jews in Germany at the time. Like, did they fight? Were they also fighting? Like, why didn't they also, you know, why didn't they turn into Adolf Hitler? I don't understand. Why was this like, like, what is this?
Groups of veterans, communist militias, like they're running cities. They're running the streets, like having running gun battles in the streets of, you know, of Berlin and Munich. And this is
the other side of the story is, ironically enough, some of the first fucking Jews that Adolf Hitler sent to the concentration camps and killed were literally directly the people that didn't want Germany to join World War I to begin with. Like, those were the Jews he killed first. So every part of this story is stupid. Every part of his analysis is dumb. It was literally the revolutionary Jews that were like, yo, let's not fucking engage in like state warfare. This shit sucks. Like, international proletarian, rise up. You know what I mean? And then they kind of continued with that attitude as well, where they were like, look at what's going on in Russia. Maybe we should do that here. And then Hitler was like, fuck you. No. He thinks that's way worse. Oh.
This goes on for a few years, you know, just total social and economic chaos. And
that makes sense,
so you're talking about like the 4-year war, but then a few more years after that. So you're 18 when you get in, and 1914. Now it's 1923 when things kind of start to stabilize, and you know you've been at this for like the first 9 years of your young adulthood, right? This is the world that you live in, and
yeah. Hitler's anti-Semitism came from previously entrenched anti-Semitic rhetoric, not World War I trauma. Hitler abused and exploited the trauma and state of Germany post-World War I to create national fascist sentiment. Yeah, I think that also is the other incredibly stupid part of the story that somewhat serves the purpose of like Hasbara propaganda too, in a weird way, but that's not surprising. Benjamin Netanyahu, top Hasbarist Benjamin Netanyahu, is also a fucking Holocaust revisionist famously, but that kind of abdicates the responsibility of anti-Semitism, historic anti-Semitism, and centuries of fucking pogroms from the hands of Christians, okay? As though like a historically significant fall guy, as though Jews were not always singled out, okay? Since Jesus. Like yeah, Hitler was basically fucking plagiarizing a lot of the anti-Semitism shit. It's not like he invented it. I would say the Russians perfected it, really. I mean, holy shit. So the idea that he you know, had a traumatic incident and then after World War I like became anti-Semitic because of just, I don't know. I don't even know what he's trying to say here. Maybe I'm just not understanding. But it is strange to act like nascent anti-Semitism had not existed, and also overt anti-Semitism had not existed in perpetuity, especially in Christian Europe. Like, yeah, he was a guy, just like most guys at the time, was fucking deeply suspicious and anti-Semitic.
It's when you try to think of, you know, I talked about like Uday Hussein being brought to watch torture sessions or something. I mean, this is not exactly that, but it's an experience that like we really have no way to relate to. And if you grow up in that world, especially when, you know, if you look at like what happened in Russia, 1917, the Russian Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, and they won. You know, they actually took over the Russian state and created the Soviet Union. You know, it lasted past the...
I feel like he doesn't like that.
Long past the lives of anybody who had fought in World War I, for the most part. And so people saw that, and they took the lesson, both from World War I itself, but also from the aftermath and the revolutions that happened. The lesson they took is that violence can accomplish our goals, you know, and whatever we do to accomplish those goals, as long as we survive, people accept it eventually. You know, Roosevelt normalized relations with the Soviet Union in 1933, when Stalin was literally still clearing bodies from the millions of people he starved in the Ukrainian Holodomor, and in Kazakhstan, another million people. And like at that time is when, and we knew it was going on, obviously.
He's like, now that's a real genocide. Joe, let me tell you, Hitler misunderstood. Stalin, real genocide guy. This is past the point of double genocide theory, where you inevitably arrive at the logical conclusion that who was a worse guy? Well, maybe Stalin. He killed a lot more. You know what I mean?
And yet,
yeah,
you know,
from double genocide theory to single genocide theory, but in the opposite direction. Yeah. That's the reason why double genocide theory is a form of Holocaust revisionism that inevitably leads to, well, look at the Black Book of Communism. Like, look at how many people Stalin killed. Look how many people Mao killed. Like, they killed a lot more. Maybe we were on the wrong side on World War II. That's like inevitably the conclusion that the reader is supposed to be left with.
Roosevelt normalized relations with Stalin, and people got over it. Just like with Turkey. Turkey does the Armenian genocide, and it's condemned at the time. You know, they were on the other side of the war and everything. But a couple years later,
was it? Wait, what? No, I don't think it was. I'm pretty sure. Wait, what? No. Wait, what did? Let me see. Oh, no. Yeah, here. I don't know if this is a real quote or not. This is from the ArmenianGenocide.org Hitler, but this is something I recently heard that I didn't even know Hitler had said. But who, after all, speaks today of the annihilation of the Armenians? Does Turkey not still deny that? Yes, of course. No, Turkey still denies it. Turkey pulled the Japanese mode and just basically were like, nah, that's not real. Shut up. The Ottoman Empire was dismantled. What the fuck does that dude mean? I know, but it doesn't. Yes, the Ottoman Empire was dismantled, but I don't think he's like factoring that in as like the crime of the Ottoman Empire in general. I think he's just simply saying like Turkey did the Armenian genocide, which is a strange. I understand why has made a lot of erroneous. He has made a lot of erroneous claims thus far, and I'm surprised that, like, as a historian, he's not hitting. He's not actually using language very deliberately, especially when talking about genocides. Is crazy.
Like, look, Turkey's an important, strategically placed country, like, in the world, and we kind of need them on our side, and so. You know, sorry, Armenians, but, you know, get over it. And so people took that lesson, is that violence will accomplish our goals.
Bro, that's crazy. So Hitler learned that violence will accomplish his goals from the real genocide that Stalin did. Okay. And then he learned that people don't care about the genocide from the real genocide that the Turks did. Okay. But Hitler's genocide himself was like, I don't know, maybe it's not so real. Like, man, Hitler was learning a lot of lessons, man. It's crazy. It's crazy. He was just learning so many lessons around the world. It's wild. Just a misunderstood guy, I think.
And as long as we accomplish them and survive, people will get over it, you know?
Oof. But again, I think this is what's really important about your work, is that you do take into consideration all these aspects, which, again, with Jim Jones, that's fine.
Yeah.
But even what you're saying is it's obviously very relevant to what when we're trying to understand how World War II happened. How did the Nazis rise to power? Like, what are we talking about? That's what we're talking about. We're talking about this horrific environment that's not considered. Doesn't make you a Nazi apologist.
Yeah, and it's important to know too that it's not like Hitler was going and giving big speeches at City Square in Berlin, going on and on and on about how we're going to kill the Jews, and the German people said right on, like.
No, he did do that. He definitely did that. This was the correction that he did. He did do that. There are only two possibilities: either victory of the Aryan or the annihilation of the Aryan and the victory of the Jew. April 4th, 1922. He wrote about it. He basically talked about it all the time. Now, I guess, like, again, there's plausible deniability in the way that Darryl Cooper is talking about this, where he can just say like, oh, well, he was just like hiding. He was just hiding his anti-Semitic tendencies. No, he fucking wasn't. Okay. He just didn't bro write a whole book about his struggle. Yeah. His struggle with the Jews. Like this is even before we get to the Holocaust. Okay. Even before he rose to power, he actively talked about the Jews. He did. So that part is incorrect.
Like, let's go do it. That was like the speeches that are out there where he is talking about the Jewish question, like almost all of those are like internal Nazi party, like rally speeches, you know, they're not him. He had to be careful about that. Like in 1938, which is pretty far down the line when Kristallnacht happened, it was kind of a nationwide pogrom against the Jews in Germany that was launched primarily by Goebbels, the propaganda minister. But there was outrage in the German cities. People in Berlin, a lot of the places were outraged by what was going on. And Hitler had to actually get on the phone with Goebbels and say, cut this shit out. Like, this is not good. Like, not because he loves the Jews all of a sudden, obviously, but because this is bad propaganda. People are not going for this. And that was the year before the war started, you know? And so these are just nuances that, you know, that become pretty obvious when you just remind yourself that you're just talking about people. They're just people. I mean, the Germans were a sophisticated, advanced political and cultural, you know, place. They didn't suddenly turn into demons for 12 years and then go back to being the nice, normal Germans that we know now. Like, these things happened the same way every other historical event, you know.
Okay. Like, what? It's so confusing because on the one hand, he's explaining how like anti-Semitism and like fascist propaganda sets in the collective consciousness of a society, which there is an analog for, by the way, and not anti-Semitism, but fascism, and how it actively needs a outside group that must be ritualistically humiliated, dehumanized. I don't know. Israel, pretty good analog. Okay. But having said that, the way he's approaching the subject matter almost makes it seem like he just keeps saying like Hitler was a small bean and you know, Goebbels was bad guy. Hitler was like, dude, cut it out. You're killing too many. Don't do it. Like, what the fuck? What the fuck? The Daily Wire is about to have a meltdown. Get Thomas Massey on. YouTube 100% nerfing the reach on this. Being called anti-Semitic doesn't mean anything anymore. It's just an attempt at character assassination. If Joe has all three guests in March, Ian Carroll, Darryl Cooper, next Candace Owens, will make Daily Wire and Free Press people brains melt. Yeah, there's a growing movement in the right that is just like, yeah, we don't fuck with the Jews movement, like straight up. I think that is what's going on, which is interesting because, yeah, if left unrestrained, of course it was going to fucking happen. You know, it seems like I'm noticing a rift in the right where on the one hand, you got the Groyper right. And then on the other hand, you got like the neocon right. That's like, you know, hate speech is completely acceptable unless you say something about Israel, in which case I want you to be sent to a concentration camp. There's like both sides want on the right. Both sides want concentration camps. One side wants to put anti-Zionists in the concentration camps first. The other side wants to put everybody and the Jews in the concentration camps. And historically speaking, the side that wants to put everyone, including all Jews, in the concentration camp kind of wins out in that battle, in that internal strife. Okay? When you got two different sides, when you got two different sides of fascism, and one is philo-Semitic maybe, or still anti-Semitic but pro-Israel, and the other side is anti-Semitic and anti-Israel, and only cares about the anti-Semitic side of things, then usually the anti-Semitic side of things actually wins out in that battle, I think.
Ends up happening, which very often is not, you know, what you find is it's not so much is not really like the result of a plot.
Make no mistake, we're still going to the concentration camps for both of these guys. Okay, this community, we're done. You know what I mean? Both sides actively get together when they think about like a person who has progressive values at all, like any progressive values done to the camps. But there is a little bit of internal strife happening at this moment, I think.
Plan or anything. People are often just reacting. And when you see this with the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, you see it with the Israel-Palestine situation, right? In those two situations, like the means that the Bolsheviks and the Zionists used to establish themselves and create their state and like sort of...
I've listened to Darryl's podcast for years. He's very close with Jocko Willink. He's a classic American right-winger who thinks, of course, the Holocaust was bad, but agrees with 90% of Hitler's takes. That's such a funny way to describe modern American right-wingers because it's so true. That's the reason why so many in Asmongold's community, for example, will on the one hand be like, oh, yuck, Hitler, I hate him. Nazis, they suck. And then they'll be like, honestly, gotta hand it to the guy when they find out about like the first book burnings being trans medical research. You know what I mean? That is a very interesting and very funny dichotomy in the American mind. The glaringly obvious cognitive dissonance of contemporary Republicans and contemporary conservatives that just on the one hand will be like, yeah, Hitler is a bad guy. That's what I was taught in school. But also, the more I learn about the things that the Nazis did, the more I'm like, yeah, maybe the Jew stuff wasn't, maybe the Jew stuff was a bridge too far. But like everything else, the socialists being sent to the camps, like that's, yeah, I fucking hate those blue-haired DEI freaks. You know what I mean?
Get their foothold. The means that they used were so violent and so over the top that it came to define, in a lot of ways, the subsequent history of those countries. You know, if you look at like Stalin's purges in the 30s and a lot of the stuff that was going on during his reign, it was really that like they had pulled off and done so many terrible things to take power. And that was really like, that was Lenin's philosophy, is again, just, you know, take it up to 11 and go. And as long as we win, people will get over it. But all of a sudden, when you've killed all these people and done all these terrible things, you look around the country and you see a lot of dangerous people who probably don't like you, even if they're not saying it right now. And you start to get a little paranoid, and it becomes kind of the definition of how your state works, you know? I mean, Israel, one of the things I really tried to...
Wait.
Philosophy is, again, just, you know, take it up to 11 and go, and as long as we win, people will get over it. But all of a sudden...
What a fantastic way to describe Lenin. Yeah, he was just tuning it up to 11. He was like, let's do violence, dude.
When you've killed all these people and done all these terrible things, you look around the country and you see a lot of dangerous people who probably don't like you, even if they're not saying it right now. And you start to get a little paranoid, and it becomes kind of the definition of how your state works, you know? I mean, Israel, one of the things I really...
Bro, comparing Lenin to Hitler and then to Israel, like... That is what is happening.
We tried to get into in the early part of that series, especially.
It's so revealing when you, as a quote unquote podcast historian, have 8.5 hours of Hitler's speeches dialed up, okay, downloaded to your fucking brain, and you can find the intricacies and the nuances within all of it to explain away how Hitler was just a classic guy but misunderstood. But then with Lenin, you're like, he's just a violent guy who was really paranoid. Like, that's insane. I'm perhaps thinking you might be a Nazi, man. I don't know. It's kind of weird. Especially because, like, it almost feels like you're carrying the same resentments that Hitler did.
Is it the Zionist project? And the more I think about it, this is kind of a theme in so many of my podcasts. You know, it started out as an idealistic venture. You know, it started out as something, you know, you have these people who are in really like kind of a unique situation.
Joe, you don't understand, okay? Cultural Bolshevism was a real parasitic force in German society. You know, they were doing a lot of gay shit in colleges, okay? Joe, let me tell you about a school that was mysteriously run by a lot of Jews. You hate socialism. I hate socialism. You know who else hated socialism? Adolf Hitler. Understood the importance of you know, populist sentiment, but he wanted to do it for a couple hand select few people, okay? And then he didn't really do any socialism. It was more like a rug pull. Okay, no socialism.
Maybe the Roma, the Gypsies are like you can really point to of like a widespread transnational group of people who do have a sort of cohesive identity, but they don't have a homeland. They're just living in other people's countries. And, you know, I think the lesson from World War II and much of the 20th century probably is kind of the opposite of the one that people have taken from World War II, which is nationalism is bad and it's dangerous and bad things happen when people start to think that way. I think the real lesson from World War II is, or from, you know, what happened.
What's the real lesson from World War II, man? I can't
to the Jews specifically is everybody needs a country. You know, you need to have a country that is looking after you and
Wait, how? So this guy's not even anti-Israel? Because that's literally the fucking Zionist project. You just described the underlying principle behind Zionism. He's just like, Joe, you don't understand. I hate him, but, okay, I hate Jews. I hate them. But, Joe, let me tell you one thing they got right. This is Richard Spencer's exact point of view, by the way. Richard Spencer hates Jews because he's a fucking neo-Nazi, but he loves Israel. He's like, why can't we have an Israel for whites? That's literally his argument. What is happening? At a certain point in 2025, it almost comes across as like you're jealous. You're jealous, dog. What the fuck? You're like, how come my people only got Rhodesia for like a brief moment, but the Jews have been doing Israel for 75 years? Like, okay, you're just a fucking equal opportunity fascist? Like, is that what it is? That's psychotic. That's insane. That's an insane way to approach the subject matter. No, you learned no lessons from World War II. What the fuck? You can't just disparage the dangers of fascist nationalism and then be like, no, the real lesson is that they had to do Israel. Yeah, you know who thinks that? Fucking every ultra-Zionist out there. What do you mean?
Looking after your interests.
He's like, yeah, Mayor Kahan, great ideas, okay? He said, never again just for Jews. And honestly, he had it real right, Joe. Let me tell you about this guy, okay? As a historian, you know who I really like in terms of ethno-nationalist identity? You know, famous terrorist Mayor Kahan.
Because living in other people's countries, it can go well for a long time. But, you know, it's not just the Jews. Like, minorities in general, like, you know, bad things happen over time. You know, minorities are just easily scapegoated.
I don't think they're
easily
serious.
Made the sort of the outlet for the frustration and resentment of people that are...
There's a growing movement in the left calling everyone Nazis law. What a joke, man. Typical Twitch chatter loses womp womp. Go suck off Hasan. Dog, this guy literally is saying Hitler was a misunderstood little guy who maybe wasn't even like really all that anti-Semitic in 2025. If I can't call that guy a Nazi, who can I call a Nazi? He's doing Nazi apologia. It's like, dude, who is a Nazi then? Adolf Hitler? Because this guy seemingly doesn't think it was, you know, it was all that bad. What do you mean? Like, guys, no one was a Nazi, okay? Not even Adolf. Adolf was misunderstood. Is a crazy position.
You know, upset over unrelated things. And it's an uncomfortable position to be in.
There's also general suspicion when cultures move into areas and don't assimilate and then try to bring with them the rules of their land, which we're particularly scared of in America. We hear the concept of Sharia law. You know, like people will start to freak out. Well, there's people that move here that want that, you know, and they don't want to assimilate and they don't want to be a part of this homogeneous culture. They want to change it. So that's scary.
That's so funny that Joe's like, yeah, no, I misunderstood. I totally understood the points that you were making. And I feel the same way that Hitler did about Jews, but for Muslims in America right now. Yeah, you're right. Nationalism wasn't the dangerous ideology. That should not have been our takeaway from World War II. Misunderstood.
Scares people too.
And America is very, you know, this is one of the, you know, America's a very unique country in a lot of different ways, but one of the...
Yeah, now he's going to start talking about how like America became like the melting pot. Then this was what the other Nazis were mad about because they were like, you don't understand.
Ways that we're so different from the European countries. You could point to a lot of things, you know, the lack of a feudal history that we were emerging out of. We kind of just started out as a liberal republic. You know, the fact that we have like the frontier experience, which is just, you know, no Europeans can really relate to what was going on out there. I don't know if you've seen that new Netflix series, American Primeval.
It's amazing,
dude. And
I had Peter Berg on here the other day.
That's right. Yeah. And all I kept thinking as I'm watching this is like, man, this is not like the U.S. Army that's out there like on the frontier confronting these situations. These are like the regular people who like went out there and lived, and this is an experience. So you have those things, but
it's very accurate too.
Yeah, it was fascinating. I loved they had Jim Bridger in there. That was I've always been a fan of his. So
yeah, that was amazing too. And how about the Mormon guy?
Dude, people
Brigham Young.
Yeah, people don't realize today, unless they really know the history, the Mormons were off the hook.
They were gangsters. They were fucking dangerous foes. You couldn't fuck with the Mormons back then.
Well, they
had been fucked with.
They were ultra cohesive, and they were serious about what they were doing. These people were not playing games. This was not like a thing to do for fun. They were dead serious about it.
And they had already been ran out of several states.
Yeah. So I was going to say, like, the thing that's so different about America from a lot of the European countries, and when we talk about nationalism, like, this is something that really, you know, that you have to keep in mind all the time, is that America, like, we've been renegotiating our identity, like, generation by generation ever since America started, like, from the very beginning. I mean, if you go back to the American Revolution and the founding of the country in the late 1700s, before those guys were dead, a bunch of the major cities, and eventually all the major cities, like very quickly by the middle of the 1800s, they're not majority Anglo anymore. It's not English people. It's a lot of Irish, a lot of Germans, still a lot of Anglos. But, you know, you have to, and the fact that different...
I agree most of your takes, but I don't think he was saying that Hitler wasn't bad, just that he misunderstood how and when to leverage anti-Jew propaganda. No, I think he was wrong on that, because the underlying sentiment is that, like, there is... it was more so just like around, and he weaponized it. Like, anti-Semitism was just like existing, and he weaponized it to rise to power. When I think that it was, it's not a chicken or the egg situation. Like, he was anti-Semitic. He was influenced by his environment in that regard, and he absolutely had rabid hatred for Jews in his heart. He was a fascist. He didn't fuck with socialists either, right? Like, obviously, we know that. But there's a reason why people talk about his anti-Semitism more than anything else, is because I think he also thought about, like, socialism as a Jewish project in general. But to make it seem as though he wasn't, like, to make it seem as though Hitler wasn't, like, genuinely anti-Semitic is crazy. Like, I think he believed that shit 100% to its core. Now you're just being unfair to Hitler. Yeah, I think you're out of your depth. I think I'll trust a real Nazi to know about Hitler more than you. No, I think that Adolf Hitler is so funny to talk about it, like, on contemporary terms, but, like, you know how when you see some people online and they just, like, hate trans people, and then there's, like, the normal kind of trans hatred that you know from your uncles or whatever, who are just like, yeah, I don't understand it, they're kind of weird. And then there's, like, the Matt Walsh level of hatred, or the Libs of TikTok level of hatred of trans people, where they just can't get trans out of the fucking mind. They literally are constantly talking about trans people all the time and think everything bad that is happening in society is because of trans people. Like Hitler had that for Jews. You know, it was obsessive. It was definitely an obsessive way to approach every subject matter. I stubbed my toe, it's the Jews. Okay. I farted the other day and a little bit of shit came out, also the Jews. You know, that sort of thing. I think that if left unchecked, bigotry of that sort, especially if it's a growing movement as well, you know, it turns into this incredibly violent principle that you operate off of.
Different religion. You know, you've got Irish Catholics coming into this Protestant, very Protestant at the time country. A lot of the Germans that were coming in were German Jews who, you know, were coming along. You think of people like Astor, you know, the famous Astor family. That was a German Jewish family that was in New York. And so that happens. And you're talking about, again, an influx large enough to to really swamp the Anglo population in many of the big cities. Well, not another, a generation later, barely 40 years after the Irish migration really hits its peak, huge influx from southern Italy, from Eastern Europe, a lot of Ashkenazi Jews coming in, and pretty soon it's not just Anglos, well assimilated, Germans who are well assimilated to the Anglo culture, and then the Irish, which is what it was before. Now you have just as many Jews, just as many Italian Catholics who are Catholics like.
I'm sorry, what? Yo, this guy is awesome. He's literally walking through the steps. He's like a Benny Franks level xenophobe. Except he factored in the Germans. He didn't say they're swarthy. That's so sick. He's like, yeah, the hard to assimilate Italians and the Slavs started coming in, and the Ashkenazi Jews started coming in, and all hell broke loose. You know what I mean? This is saying that right now is so funny because every group that you're talking about is firmly within the conflict, like the in-group. You can't, you would never be able to decouple, at least in this stage, Italians from being white, from being considered white. You would never be able to decouple, Polish people from being considered white in the United States of America right now. Yes, when they were first immigrating into the country, just as that in-group of white identity growing now for Hispanics, and Hispanic people also self-identifying as white. Right now, it's happening in real time. So it's like something that you can see, something that you can exhibit in your lifetime. Yes, initially, all groups that were coming in, whether they be Irish or Italian or whatever, were not initially factored in as white. There was a lot of resentment towards them. And slowly but surely, throughout decades and throughout generations, they basically became white. And now they are white. That's how it works. That's how whiteness works. The one group of people that will never be considered white are black people. Outside of that, and indigenous people. Outside of that, everyone is either white or white adjacent, like a model minority. Everyone has the capacity to be factored into the white dynamic.
Like the Irish, but they're still not quite, there's still different communities. And we've just had to do that all the time. Even in 1924, when we kind of shut down immigration after the First World War. We basically shut down immigration from 1924 to 1965. There was some, but very limited and very selective. But as soon as that happened, as soon as the immigration pipeline was from Europe was cut off, that's when the great migration of African Americans out of the South starts. And in about 40 years, you get 6-7 million African Americans coming mostly from the country South into places like Detroit and all the places that you kind of associate with large African American communities now. It's kind of crazy to think about, but if you go back to the First World War, Detroit's African American population was 2%. And that was Philadelphia, Baltimore. I think Baltimore had 8 or 9, but that was how it was. Pretty much all African Americans still lived down in the South. And so over the course of about 40 years, they all move out to all the big cities, and you have to still, they're from America, obviously, but, you got to renegotiate, your...
Yeah, I wonder why they were all in the South. It's just interesting to think. How'd they get there? What were they doing down there? Why would they leave the South? Much to consider here, but who knows?
Your identity with these people and figure out...
I think he maxed out on Hitler speeches so hard that he just, is not factoring in American history to his analysis, weirdly enough. He just only has a finite amount of space in there, and it is filled to the brim with Hitler. Okay.
A new political compromise in these cities in the various places. And I'm
noticing another thing that he's saying, which is that even internally in the United States of America, there are still groups that seemingly can't assimilate to the in-group. And I think that what he's trying to say here is black people were just not assimilating to the in-group of white people. What could it be? He is a nationalist. He thinks that it's not a bad word. weirdly enough, he also seems to claim that I think like black people also have some semblance of inferiority. So it seems like he's a nationalist for maybe white people. Is there a word for that? I can't seem to place my finger on what he means here.
A great migration of African Americans starts to peter out. 1965, we reopen the floodgates of immigration. That's the world we're kind of in now. And so and look, especially back in the day, in the first like two big waves of migration into the U.S., the Ellis Island, migrations, like those were like America would not be here today if we didn't do that. Like there were not enough out of work English people, over in England to come over here and take over this whole continent. It was just never going to happen. The only way it was ever going to happen is.
Okay, that's the other side of this. Okay, you can't be pro-America and also incredibly critical of Israel because Israel is a settler colony. America also, and this might come as a surprise to many, was a settler colony, is a settler colony built on the foundations of indigenous genocide, just like Israel. So yes, you're right. America desperately needed more people to come into what is now known as the United States of America. Okay, this is true. Twitch's head delusional leftist is at it again. Yeah, I know. I know. I'm just saying some dumb shit once again. That's what settler colonies need. They need members of the in-group or a cohesive identity that they can craft together on whichever boundaries they choose to do so. And for Israel, obviously, it's Zionism and ethno-religious superiority over the indigenous population. For Americans, it was like, Anglo-Saxon Protestants initially. And because they're tapped out at that point, they need basically other people to also come from Western Europe and Europe in general. So yeah, they were trying to fill the land to the best of their ability.
As if we were radically open and tolerant to people, because you go back to there's a naturalization law. I think it was the first naturalization law on the books in the United States, 1798. And you see a lot of like racialist types point to this as if it kind of backs up their idea of what, of what America's history is and what it should be, because it says all white persons of good character, all free white persons of good moral character, if you come to the United States, can become a citizen. And people see that and they focus on the white part and they say, see, they wanted America to be a white country or whatever. That is totally the wrong way to understand that law. I mean, if you were to go to like France or Germany or England or whatever, for them to pass a law that said anybody in the continent, any European, you guys can come over here and we will make you a citizen with the full legal rights and privileges of our richest citizen. You will be an equal citizen. You can just come here. Radically open. I mean, really like a revolutionarily open kind of law, especially back then. You got to remember, like, the Europeans still had another 150 years of just wantonly slaughtering each other, left still ahead of them. You had like today, I mean, if you have like a person on, who lives to the left of you and they're the Thatcher family and they're vaguely, English, and then you have the McCoy family on the other side and they're vaguely Irish, they're just kind of white people to you now. Like, it all kind of seems like, what's the difference? Dude, go tell an English and Irish person that they were the same thing back in 1798. Like they did not identify with each other at all. There's a lot of bad blood, a lot of hostility. And so to say, all of you people with all your differences, you come over here and get with the program and you can be one of us, just radically open. And again, we had to do that or else the country would not be here. Or it would be an Anglo country sort of clustered around the 13 colonies and maybe moved in a bit. But, we wouldn't have this whole continent against the French and the Spanish and everybody else who was around unless we were that open. And so that was like a prerequisite for America becoming what it is today. In Europe, it's very different, man. Like
he added on to this on Twitter. I read his thoughts on this because other Nazis were getting mad at him for saying this. because he criticizes, if you noticed, he subtly criticizes what he calls racialists, right? And what he's saying in this situation is like the only reason why they said white is because the only reason why they factored in white of good moral character was because he's saying that at the time they were worried that like France and England and everywhere else, they would send like their lower class, black and brown population in an effort to, in his words, goose up the demographics, or in an effort to like basically win favor in the demographics of like French citizens in America, or French colonialists, or English colonialists. Let me see if I can find a, hold on. The main reason the law was restricted to whites was not to prohibit mass third world immigration, because no one at that time could have conceived of such a thing even being taken seriously. This part is not entirely incorrect, I don't think, to be fair. Like, there was no concept such as third world or global south. That was not like a thing that people thought about. Not dissimilar to how pre 9/11, there was a little bit of resentment and frustration and anger and bigotry towards Muslims, but it was nowhere near to the same level as like post 9/11 America. There was a time and place in the United States of America, even before the Iranian Revolution, for example, where like no one cared if you were Muslim. That wasn't even a thing. Like, people didn't even think about that. So I think that's what he means. Like, Americans had not developed some sort of like resentment towards, this is pre-American empire. So Americans are not developing resentments or even thinking about like a concept such as a global south. Anyway, that's what I mean. And third world obviously is a post-Soviet construction regardless. So he's just using that as a stand-in, as a terminology for developing nations. It was to keep states from gaming the system by including blacks and Indians as citizens to goose their electoral representation. Yeah, here, this is why he said the reason why the inclusion of whites was to keep states from gaming the system by including blacks and Indians as citizens to goose their electoral representation, and to keep the Spanish and French from driving all their non-white subjects into the United States. The point I'm trying to develop is that from the beginning, America had to be radically open if we were ever going to conquer and settle this continent. But by the 1960s, it had become a deeply embedded moral imperative that we couldn't switch off when the global South started arriving. And I think that ethnic got exported to the European countries under U.S. influence. I feel like this guy's maybe a little bit of a white nationalist. Just saying. Weirdly enough, he also doesn't. How are you going to be a racist and not talk about like the Chinese Exclusionary Act, or how we have always imported? I think that ethic, not ethnic. Sorry, I think that ethic of having like open borders got exported to the European countries under U.S. influence, or maybe, just maybe, this is a byproduct of colonial exploitation. There's so many Indians in England. It's like, how'd that happen? It's not because they're woke, okay? The fuck? It's because there is a constant necessity for capital owners to have a domestic underclass that they can hyper exploit. America does it tenfold by documented migration and undocumented migration. It is a part of the reason why America has been able to, at the very least, like, avoid the trappings of other developed nations in terms of its birth rates. There is no population crisis here because of that. Yeah, the global South started arriving like America was neutral, and that is so funny. Exactly. That's what I mean. It's just like they didn't. I wonder why the global South started arriving in the 60s. Anyway, let's continue.
There's such thing as a Polish person. And Poland is the country where Polish people live. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And like over here in America, like we have a much more fluid identity. We're constantly having to renegotiate it. And it's, we think it's difficult today, to integrate the immigrants that we've got and to try to renegotiate that.
It's not. It's not difficult at all. All this stuff is just pure, unfettered, racist nonsense. The moment that you think personally, with your endless caucasity, that people from any part of the fucking planet cannot integrate by the second generation, and especially so by the third generation, to being an American, is a moment where you automatically assume that there is some sort of like intrinsic factor at play that stops people from integrating to American culture. It's not only objectively untrue, just fucking look around, dumbass. It's not only objectively untrue, but it's also incredibly fucking racist. It's just an academic way to describe racism. That's it. You could get a dude from, I don't know, the uncontacted tribes, okay? And, you know, shoot him up with vaccines and stuff so he doesn't die to diseases that he's never even experienced yet, okay? And the moment that that person has a child in the United States of America, that person is going to be American, both as he has citizenship now, okay? But also culturally, that person is going to grow up in America, grow up and go to American institutions, grow up watching American television. That person is American. That's it. It's incredibly stupid when people think that there is some sort of difference in the way that they approach the world, and that these differences are not manageable, and they actually cause great fissures in society and actually cause society to collapse. Okay? No human being is incapable of integration, assimilation, and just becoming a part of the in-group. The moment that you start thinking that way is the moment that you're entered incredibly racist thoughts. As an alleged historian, shouldn't he know that the biggest leaps in our economy, technology have followed mass migrations, and historically when nations become xenophobic and isolationist, they decline and collapse? Yeah, but he thinks, you know, look at Poland, they're all Polish.
It's always been difficult. And to try to transfer our way of thinking about social identity, our way of thinking about, you know, what a nation is to the European countries, it does not apply. Like, it really doesn't work.
It's also, there's a thing when an all-white country wants to stay all-white where people get very nervous of. If you have, you know, let's say China. Like, China is Chinese people. We all agree that it's like, it's filled primarily with Chinese people. Yeah. There's people that live there from all walks of life, all over the world, but it's mostly Chinese people. If China...
Yeah, China is an incredibly diverse country, and even the concept of Han Chinese in and of itself has numerous differences that you would normally, if you were to look at it from the lens of, like, I don't know, fucking European racial differences or European ethnic differences, you would consider even the Han Chinese to be a very different racial demography. If that's I don't know how to describe it. Like, that's not, there are multiple ethnic groups in China, but the Chinese government factors their own, Chinese government looks at their own demographics as Han Chinese versus, like, not versus, but Han Chinese, Tibetans, Uyghurs in Xinjiang. Having said that, it is, even the Han Chinese are also very diverse. Like, even if there are, yes, there's around like 50 or 56 ethnic groups in China, something like that. I don't know the exact number, but the if you have a country that is so vast as China, okay, look, this is why I'm saying you're not hearing what I'm saying. The People's Republic of China officially recognizes 56 distinct ethnic groups, the largest of which are Han, which constitute 91% of the total population in 2010. The Han Chinese are diverse in and of itself when it comes to language, when it comes to the way they look, when it comes to their appearances, their food, the fucking way they dress. That's what I'm trying to explain to you. You can't have a fucking ginormous country the size of a fucking continent and have some kind of like catch-all ethnic, like Han Chinese are also not monolithic is what I mean. Yes, saying Han is like saying white in America. Exactly. The difference, of course, is that because of centuries of history, it's seen as like one group, but it's totally different. Yeah, but they all look Chinese. You lose. This is true. Yeah, the Han Chinese people can be defined into subgroups based on linguistic, cultural, ethnic, genetic, and regional features. The terminology used in Mandarin to describe groups is, I'm not going to read these, but whatever. There's like, no Han subgroup is recognized as one of People's Republic of China's 56 official ethnic groups. In Taiwan, only 3 subgroups, Hakka, Hoklo, and Waishengren, are recognized. Does that make sense? Do you understand? It's like saying all of Europe is, if all of Europe basically melded into one fucking pot and considered themselves to be European, and then, you know, 1,000 years later, we're like, oh, well, those are all European, right? Like that's all European people. What are you talking about? Like that's people who are Euroids. that would be what it's like. The irony, of course, is that's kind of what America is like as well. With white, that's the in group. Do not invent words. What the fuck? No, I love doing that.
Had decided that they wanted to remain Chinese and stay Chinese, and that being Chinese was very important to what China is, no one would have a problem with that.
Yeah.
When a country like Poland does it, you're like, oh, those white people.
Yeah.
Does Turkey have a lot of ethnic groups? Yes. Turkey was the Ottoman Empire. Russia had the Russian Empire and the USSR. Of course, these countries have numerous different, like my background, if I were to do like a 23andMe, my background would show Arab, Kurd, Greek. Okay? Like, of course, countries that have long histories of being empires will have an incredible amount of genetic diversity. The difference, of course, is that everybody says they're Turkish. You can do that for every country, by the way.
Keep everybody out. They want it to be all white.
Yeah, and
because we're, you know, that's post World War II. That's post Aryan race talk. That's post Nazi stuff. That's what.
Yeah, or even Israel with Jews. Like Jews in Israel make up everything from Ashkenazi to Ethiopian Jews. Like, exactly. It's what you do with the outgroup that matters in this regard, though. Like that's the difference. If you give equal rights to every single person that lives in your country, then it's not that big of a fucking problem. If you allow your ethnic minorities in your country to share in their own culture and contribute to the in-group, then there's no problem.
People are legitimately freaked out about. That's the most recent stain in our history where we look back and say, wow, that was close. Evil almost won that one.
I think it also has to do with, you know, the interesting thing is, you know, Poland, bloc countries, even though communism was extremely hostile to national identity, you know, and really, I mean, took a lot of brutal measures to try to stamp it out because they wanted everybody to be a kind of new Soviet citizen, you know?
Yeah.
Those countries that are over there now.
He hates communism and loves nationalism so much that he won't even factor in like Russification. Like he won't even do an apt criticism of the USSR because in his mind that would come across as like potentially nationalistic, and he thinks nationalism is good and communism is bad. So he can't even fucking criticize the USSR on that from that perspective, which is pretty funny.
Are much more comfortable sort of saying, yeah, Hungary is a country where Hungarians live and this is a Christian country and we want to keep it that way. Whereas all the countries that were on the other side of the Iron Curtain under the influence of the United States.
Somebody should Rick Scott Hamas poker. What, make me a fucking billionaire by way of doing insane amounts of Medicare fraud? Is that what you mean?
States kind of had our traditional way of looking at these things kind of imposed on them. You know what I mean? Or they absorbed it through osmosis. I don't know if it's like a program or something, but they, you know, we were the
He's like, bro, can you make Hasan get $300 million in stock options after doing the largest Medicare fraud American government has ever seen at the time?
And it's sort of cultural and military force and everything else, political force. And so they kind of, you know, absorbed the American openness and tolerance of all comers that we kind of had to have, as I said, in places where it really makes no sense at all. I mean, you have you could at least say, like with the British Empire or something, you know, they colonized all these places, and so now like those people in the former colonies, like they're moving to Britain, and you know, you could, if like I don't really think of it this way. You could look at it that way, though. If you look at a place like Ireland, they didn't colonize anybody. You know, Ireland was a colony. They suffered terribly under the British for a long time. And yet it's very interesting that, you know, they were willing to be brutalized, be occupied, be starved, you know, all of these things for centuries to defend their little slice of the world where their people could work out their destiny among themselves, you know. Endured so much for that. And then, you know, you get up to about the 1960s, 1970s, and, you know, you can look it up. This isn't like a conspiracy theory. It's the first things that come up on Google if you look it up, that, you know, Ireland is on track to be minority Irish by like 2070 or something like that. And it's like, I don't like that. You know, people think of diversity as like every place on the planet should look like Jackson Heights in New York, and like then we're diverse. But to me, that's not diversity at all. Diversity is I go to Ireland and it's Irish. I go to China and it's Chinese. I go, you know what I mean? Like,
right.
And turning it all into sort of a homogenized, like mixed, you know, soup. I think when you put it in those terms, nobody really wants that. And, you know, people.
I mean, I want that. I like that. I'm a beneficiary of it. I think it's awesome. It's like one of the few good things about America. What the fuck? What do you mean nobody really wants that? What a strange thing to say. It's funny because like Americans love dunking on England and saying like, look how bland your fucking food is and shit. And then without even a fucking shred of irony, turn around and be like, and we should make America a ethnically homogenous white nation. Like, what the fuck? You love saying that, not just me. People, a lot of people. If you think it's just me who shits on British food, come on, big dog. I mean, wake up, all right? Wake up, mate. Lots of people think that. It's not just me, innit? Yeah. Don't get me fucking started here. A little bit of jellied eels, right? A little bit of fucking jellied.
But people get very uncomfortable, you know? And in America, with immigration specifically, it's really hard to like, you know, the fact that it's not like we're a Christian country in the sense of it being worked into our political culture so much or anything anymore, but still like the values that most people, even atheists and everybody else kind of, that inform their moral outlook are derived from that legacy of Christian.
No. What? No. We're not a Christian country, and we've never been a Christian country. We are a capitalist country. Even our fucking branch of Christianity has evolved. Even our version of Christianity has evolved to basically initially uplift white supremacist chattel slavery and then very quickly prosperity gospel style pro-capitalist sentiment. America's religion is McDonald's, man. It's burger. Like, what are you talking about? This is genuine cope, okay? The notion that America has ever been Christian or ever will be Christian or we've lost touch with our Christian roots or whatever is so fucking stupid. It is the least Christ-like country on the planet. I mean, I'll take that. Burgers are goated. No, I love burger. I do.
Christianity, you know? And it could be very hard for somebody who is working from that moral base to come up with a reason that, I mean, look, imagine you're in a room and you're sitting at a table, and across from the table is a man, his wife, and their two kids, and they're from some poor part of the world, and they want to come, you know, they want to be a part of your country. You're not going to be able to come up with a reason that justifies keeping them out. I mean, the only one that you could come up with is that when you open the door to that room, there's 65 million people standing in line outside. And you can't do that. But like on an individual level, like people really have a lot of trouble. And I think this is a credit to Americans in a lot of ways, even if it causes us a lot of confusion, that it is hard for us to turn people away like that, you know? And
I mean, I think that if America didn't fuck with so many countries, people wouldn't want to come here out of either sheer desperation or just sheer desperation. Usually that's what it is. Like, same with England, same with all fucking, like, does this guy think it's an accident that France has a lot of Algerians, for example, like, you know, people from Algeria? Like, how did that happen? England has a lot of Indian people. How did that happen? Like, what, as opposed to America that has a bit of everybody, a lot of Latin American countries. How did that happen? Like, how did that happen? It's just strange that that's just how it happened. I don't know why. People just really liked it, I guess. Yeah, it's tremendous amount of direct violence being dished out by the home nation against its colonies. How did Joe Rogan go from Bernie guy to this? Dude, in an alarmingly quick period of time, I think. No, he doesn't think it's an accident. That's why he's an anti-imperialist white nationalist and mad at Trump for caving to the Israel lobby. Oh, he's one of those guys who's like, we should stop doing war because we get too many ethnic minorities here and they can't fucking assimilate. It's weird though, because like when we're waging war, we use those ethnic minorities to wage the war anyway. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Again, I'm a simple man, okay? I think everyone is capable of doing great things. Everyone has unlimited potential. You can call me a pussy. You can call me an idealist if you think that. I think that we are all a product of our material conditions, and I don't think that anyone has any sort of cultural or racial inferiority over another person, and that as long as people are unshackled from the restraints that they exist under in a global capitalist system, they would be able to live freely and maximize on their potential. There are no significant differences. It's all idealistic nonsense. It's all fucking garbanzo. And liberals and Nazis, especially fascists, basically take that idealistic good-bad dynamic and cultural inferiority versus superiority to its maximalist position and assume falsely that there are unaddressable differences between different races. If you're a Nazi, you think different races are inferior and some races are superior. If you're a liberal, you kind of say culture. You say there's cultural differences and that causes people to not be able to assimilate. I don't think there are any differences whatsoever. I think that it's just a matter of time. And it's a very shitty, or yeah, religious differences. Liberals think like, you know, inferior religions cause people to have inferior ways of thinking, inferior modes of thinking. I think all that's bullshit. These people never look at, yeah, Appalachia is a great example of this. They never look at fucking West Virginia. They never look at like a white dude living in a trailer park and understand that, like, you know, yes, white people when used and abused can also reflect the same things that you attribute to other races falsely. Don't temporarily skip to 117. It's wild. Wait, why? What's in 117?
So that I can more easily like climb up the pole and pull myself up there. And so, you know, the strength, that's what's happening. And run in there, bridge when you get to the bathroom. I'm halfway and there's a little platform and then right angle goes down the other way. And I have to go so bad that I just jump down the first flight of stairs. And then I jump down the second flight of stairs. My socks hit the tile floor, slide out. I fall on my back, bang my head, and shit everywhere.
I think I'm done for the day, man. I'm done with this guy. That is a very unique way to poop sock me, I will admit. Here, one last note on this fucking dude. Paragon of racial superiority. It's always guys like this, bro. It's always guys that are like, here's how I shit myself. Also, other cultures are inferior. Always a motherfucker who has a funny story shitting himself and sitting in that poop. That's going to tell you about how some cultures are just inferior, Joe. Oh, that's what broke you, not the Nazi stuff? Yes, because my brain is broken and I eat a metric ton of this Nazi shit on a daily fucking basis. Where is it? In light of Tucker Carlson and Trump quoting him, I think we should know that Darryl Cooper is a fascist. I've been a fan of his brilliant podcast for years, but though nuanced, this aspect of his politics is undeniable. Some of these posts have been deleted. Franco was a great leader. I dearly admired the man for his time and place. This is the real reason the DC establishment flipped its lid when Trump brought up Hunter Biden's corrupt ties to the Ukrainian natural gas company. They all do it. They all sell their political access to voters that voters provide to them. How do you stop it? Democracy is a disease. Tyranny is the cure. Fascism is merely what happens when normal people realize that the left will never stop until they're forced to. I don't know, and I want to look into it more. It flies in the face of my libertarian biases on questions like this. Do you have a libertarian bias? I always thought of you more as a non-racist fascist, if that even makes sense. It does make sense, and it's a decent description. I mean that I generally accept the libertarian argument that prohibition only produces black markets. Also worth mentioning a short-lived podcast, Decline of the West, in which he espouses the virtues of arch-conservative philosopher Oswald Spengler, and on one episode enthusiastically agrees with many points made by a white nationalist. This is Martyr Made, aka Prophecy. Things will have tipped over when Tucker Carlson looks directly in the camera at his audience and says, they will call you a fascist, don't listen to them. Like a bad acid trip, you just want to end. People living under democracy become exhausted by politics. We want to go back to our normal lives, but fear of what our enemies will do if we look away. Paranoia and exhaustion are why all democracies slide to tyranny. What percentage of American citizens would be able to present a substantive and coherent argument orally in writing for why democracy is good? Less than 1%, because democracy is not good. And there are no substantive coherent arguments that it is. Like, I mean, everyone's got a little bit of a tyranny, authoritarian streak in them. Okay. All governments are inherently authoritarian. I'm not an anarchist. Some of that is valid and good. The point is, he wants to do it at the behest of like a ethnically homogenous utopia that he thinks is a utopia. I think is a dystopia. If the far right is as bad as the far left, why do they have to hide themselves? Oh, don't worry. I feel like they're not hiding themselves any longer. I think everybody tries to integrate themselves or reintegrate their worldview to the mean. And liberalism is the hegemonic monoculture. And therefore, a lot of right-wingers and even a lot of left-wingers will try to angle their commentary in that direction. Okay, that's the reason why they try to masquerade as people with like normal conservative positions. But as normal conservative positions move further and further right, as liberalism is understandably incapable, historically and in contemporary American society, incapable of dealing with fascism, and as fascism becomes more alluring to a lot of these people, they kind of just like shed the dog whistles and start Sig Heiling, first as a joke, and then also with the utmost sincerity. That is where we're at. That's where we're at right now. We're moving in the utmost sincerity direction. In the past, multicultural societies have been authoritarian and usually imperial. The modern West is the real first experiment in multicultural democracy. The safe bet is that democracy will give way to authoritarianism, and when it does, the majority of us will welcome it. So does us include you? What could be more desirable for a society than a competent, charismatic autocrat? Democracy made sense when power was devolved locally and operated through overlapping corporate entities and community groups. But mass national democracy asks us to expend significant time and emotional energy in exchange for a measure of influence that rounds the zero. I know I say this whether or not there's a virus, but let's end democracy and put the military in charge. This guy's just horny for authoritarianism no matter which way it goes, I think. Just kidding. He doesn't want... I assume he hates China. He usually puts the "I'm just trolling" line when he's called out for it, but I'm not sure why else anyone would spend so much time defending fascism's honor and credibility if they didn't harbor those same ideals. Resistance pattern matching to establish a pattern of conduct for Kavanaugh. Some of us have been here for a long time, John, wondering when you would catch up for how long the dark path we've already traveled. Fascism is nothing more than what happens when normal people realize that the left will never stop until they're forced to. Yeah, I think it's safe to say he's a bit of a fascist. It's just funny because he thinks he'll be ruling. That's always the fantasy, right? Like anarcho-capitalists, libertarians, fantasize about a future society where they will be the ones who own the slaves and that they won't be the slaves. It's like, bro, you're already a slave in the current formation. Why the fuck do you think you would be anything but like a slave in a worse condition? You know? You're already a fucking wage slave. You're gonna be a peasant, okay? Sorry. This is a thing that people don't understand. Like, this guy thinks he's gonna be a part of the dominant class. Okay? He's gonna magically become one of the people at the top when that happens. This is why I think like socialism makes a lot more sense for the majority. It just on that virtue alone, like the idea is to destroy the existing class structure rather than reshape it. Rather than reshape it and rename it and then make it worse and more violent. Like make the system that upholds it more violent. But dumb fucks think like, oh no, if we perpetuate the existing class structure and make it more violent, I'll magically become the guy who's in charge of it. It's like, no, you won't. You have nothing. Okay? You have nothing right now. If you are broke, if you're broke right now, and you drive a fucking busted ass Honda Civic that's a hand-me-down from your older brother, he fucked in it, you haven't fucked in it at all because you have no time to get pussy. Why the fuck do you think in an anarcho-capitalist dystopia you're magically going to be owning the fucking factory, dog? You are going to be melted for biomatter, okay? Once your use is done in the factory floor as a slave that eats whatever kind of fucking generic paste they shove down your gullet every day after you're done and you're tired and you're trying to go to sleep on your fucking sack, they are going to melt you, okay? Like a horse that goes to the glue factory. Why do you think you will be the king? You can't be the king right now. What makes you think you will be king in that society? It makes no sense. You're fucking stupid. Stop advocating for these things. Advocate for something better. Anyway, yeah, fascism is just a rug pull for civil liberties. Oh, that's a great way to put it. Yeah, you know what will make things better? If I have no freedom. Like I have a little bit of freedom right now. No economic freedom, no material freedom, no freedom to not constantly worry about medical debt destroying me or whatever. But you know what'll be better? If I also can't even fucking speak my mind on top of everything else. That seems good. But to be fair, they do love rug pulls, all these fucking idiots. They're like, oh, one day I'm going to be the one pulling the rug. Anyway, all right, I'm done for the night. I love you guys, but I'm tired. I'll see y'all tomorrow for some fun shit, okay? Tomorrow is a fun